Thrillers. These are books that are meant to make you think, meant to jar the mind, meant to make you believe that maybe actually some of these things could happen in real life. What happens when you get an author that takes all of those things in the actual emotions of a story that truly could have happened in real life and combine them all together? You get 4 extraordinary books that you should all go check out and read. Join me as I talk to thriller author Sara Ennis on this episode of True Crime and Authors.
Welcome to True Crime and Authors Podcast, where we bring 2 passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Here's your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody? And welcome to another episode of True Crime and Authors. Of course, I'm your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, be sure to follow us on all of our social medias. One link to a link tree will get you everywhere you need to go. Well, if you are looking at your calendars or following the show, you know it is time for an author interview, one of the first ones of the new year of 2023. And boy, we do have a good one for you today. So let me tell you about our guest. She has been telling stories since before she could hold a pencil. First, she used flashcards in a typewriter her grandfather gave her for her 6th birthday. When she was 7, she'd write book reports about books that only existed in her mind. In 3rd grade, her class produced a play she'd written. People who know her well think some of the details from her real life would make a fascinating story, but she says the stuff she writes is much more believable and a lot less traumatic. She is a fan of good tequila, travel, cooking, and animals, not in that order. And she was born in Santa Monica, California, but moved intentionally and with intent to Des Moines, Iowa about 20 years ago. She lives with her floofy personal assistant, Charlie, who edits her newsletter, and camera-shy but very bossy feline, Sasha. She is the author of The Dollhouse Duality, which includes the books The Dollhouse, The Hunted Sins of the Father, and The Mercy Angel of Death. And now, upon her release of her 4th book, Little Doves, she is one of my 4 queens of thrillers. Please welcome Sara Ennis. Sara, how are you today?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here, for coming back. It's good to see you. Full disclosure, we did shoot Sara back in August. Technical difficulties caused that not to be released. So that way, if you guys think I'm more comfortable with her than anybody else, we know Sara very well. But now that gives us a pause to talk about her new book.
Yeah. So exciting.
So we were going to talk all about Little Doves. We want to talk a little bit about your other 3 books first. But first, let me say, because at the time this gets released, Little Doves will be out. So happy Pub Day.
Thank you.
How does it feel to finally release this book upon the world?
Oh, I'm excited. I'm very proud of this book, even though it's really dark. And it wasn't easy to write. It wasn't fun to write, but I think it's an important topic. And I think it touches on things that have happened in the world that we hear about on the news, stuff like Epstein, getting away with things. And so it just felt like the right time and a story I wanted to tell. So it feels good that it's getting out. I hope people like it. Some of the reviews have said it's a little too brutal, but I try to be upfront that it's going to be that way. And I also try not to be too graphic, although there's times you have to be a little bit graphic.
Well, we're going to get all into that. First, I want to know a little bit more about you for the audience, and then we'll talk about your other 3 books, and we would definitely dive into Little Doves because that book was thrilling and jarring in some parts. So you was raised and born here in Santa Monica. You moved to Des Moines with intent. What facilitated that move for you?
Well, I was running away from home. My mom had moved in with me for a month, and then 7 years later, she still hadn't left. And I decided it was time for me to retake control of my life and do what I wanted to do. And I knew some people in Des Moines, and I had been here to visit, and it was a beautiful city. And I thought, that's different from LA. It's really different from LA. So I'm going to try that. And I knew I could go home if I wanted to. So I moved here 3 months after the first time I visited.
So, barring that you don't have to deal with gridlock LA traffic anymore,
Right.
and now you're surrounded by all kinds of green stuff, what else makes you happy that you decided to move to Iowa?
The people are really nice, which is great. Like you said, there's Iowa's version of gridlock, which usually involves a tractor. That's a little different than California gridlock. But here, if I used to drive 17 miles to work each day, and it would take me about an hour and 15 minutes. Here, if I drive 17 miles or an hour and 15 minutes, I'm in a whole different place, not the same city, in a different, area. So that's really nice. Housing is super affordable comparatively. You can get anywhere within 20 minutes. Well, it's maybe 30 now because it's growing quite a bit. The houses are beautiful. I got my dream house within 3 years of moving here, and I couldn't ever have afforded that similar house in California ever. It's just a nice place to live, except for the, -40 wind chill that we occasionally get. That part wasn't so nice.
Well, I definitely agree with you. The housing. I live in Palmdale, as you know, and when I came here now 22 years ago, you could buy a house for $15,000, $30,000.
Wow.
Now that they've built everything around, the average house here is $300,000.
Right.
So
right.
It is very expensive to live here in good old California.
It is. Yeah. I got my first house for $45,000 when I moved here, and it was sitting on a hill overlooking a river in town. So I'm like, that's pretty cool. That couldn't happen in California.
Yeah, see, that's $1 million property here in California.
Right. Oh, at least. Yeah. Well, yeah. And it was on a third of an acre, which you cannot get in California, at least not, the parts where I was living.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have one of the best assistants in the world. I've had interactions with Charlie.
Yes.
Who's your dog. He is your newsletter writer.
Yep.
So how did Charlie get that job as your editor and mascot?
Well, I don't know if people know this about me. I'm a big animal lover. I started an animal nonprofit in 2009 that's still going. And I had a pet food company for 8 years that was a buy one, give one. So sort of like Tom's Shoes and Blue Buffalo got together. If you bought a bag, we'd give a bag. And so it's a big passion for me. It's not just I like my animals. So I know people who love thrillers and books in general tend to like animals as well. So I thought, well, let's have Charlie write the newsletter because, she's got a different perspective on things than I do. And she's cute. she's a blind German Shepherd, Husky, Aussie mix. But she's ball obsessed, which is just odd to have a blind dog be ball obsessed. But that's her life is her ball.
Well, one thing I think about you is I think you're a fabulous writer. The one reason I do this show is to hopefully introduce the audience to authors they've never heard of before, or even in my case, they try a different genre than what they have. I was introduced to you by a girl named Kirsten, who I'm part of her readers group. She was going to read The Dollhouse, wanted people to buddy read it with her. But the catch was I had to read 2 books because you were dropping the newest one, I believe, that May.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what is it? There's a Sara Ennis, A Dollhouse, and what kind of book is it? And they're like, thriller. I'm like, I said, I'll give it a shot. And then I got hooked. So then we started reaching out saying, hey, man, I can't wait until the May drop. Can we, do you know Sarah? Can we get on the list? And I got to read all 3 beforehand. But on that, you're an independent author. Reading your books, I don't think any publishing house would turn down the opportunity to have you. Are you independent by choice or just something you decide? Okay.
By choice. I did a lot of looking around, talking to people, and thinking about it before I published to see whether I wanted to go traditional or if I wanted to be an independent author. And I went with indie because I'm a control freak. I don't want other people making important decisions for me. And because I don't want to stick to someone else's schedule. That was a big deal for me. A lot of traditional books you publish once a year. And I was just like, no, I think I want to do more than that. And I maybe wanted to be able to write in multiple genres. The other thing is going the traditional route is so slow. You have to find an agent. Then when you find an agent, which isn't easy, they have to pitch your book, and they pitch it to one of the big 5 publishing houses who are constantly having drama, it seems. And let's say they take it, they could get all the way through the process and then decide not to publish because they just published a book that was similar. It's just, I like control, and there is not a lot of control there. And I honestly, to be honest, I think you can make more money being an independent, because the traditional model is based on advances and earning out, and the number of books that sell may not earn back the advance, and then you don't have anyone willing to sell your next book. So as hard as I work here is what the reward is going to be. I'm not waiting for somebody else to do something, and my career doesn't hang on that.
So as an indie author, does it cost you more money than if you were with a publishing house?
Yes. I pay for everything. I pay for my developmental editor, my copy editor, my cover, all the art copies that I send, and I send them through Amazon. So I pay full price. But I want to make sure they get into my ARC team's hands. That comes out of my pocket. And I'm fine with that. I think it's well worth it. I pay for ads on Facebook or Amazon or whatever. Everything comes out of my pocket. But again, I get to control where it goes and what it does and what it looks like. And I would rather do that and be able to be consistent quality too. I don't have to worry about if it's going to be a different designer every time or something.
Well, that has to be a good peace of mind right there.
Yeah.
That's why they support you guys as indie authors, because I do know you do probably more work than an author that isn't a publishing house. So I'm glad to support you guys.
Well, thank you. Just for the record, the current publishing traditionally, they still have to work really hard. They just don't have to pay out of pocket as much. I think most of the money comes out of their publisher's pocket.
Now, on your website, you have an interesting thing that's at the top of your header. It says, why do people do the things they do? Let's explore the psychology of violence. You ever have an emblem on to the left that is the psychology of violence? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Ever since I was a kid, and I'm not going to go into why, but ever since I was a kid, I've wondered why people do the weird stuff they do, the horrible stuff they do. Why do people treat other people the way they do? But I'm interested in it not just from a outcomes perspective, but what starts the thing in their head that makes them go that path. And so I would much rather look at a bad guy and understand how they became a bad guy than just figure out how to catch the bad guy. So all of my books, I think, explore the bad guy as well as the good guy. And I try to show that there's almost always something that tips a person into making those terrible, terrible decisions.
Now, the Dollhouse Duality is a pretty intense trilogy. It's very in-depth. I did read that you produced all 3 of these books, which are thrillers, under a year.
Yeah.
When did you find time to do all of that?
I don't have a personal life. Well, it was during the main part of the pandemic, so that helped a lot. We were working from home in my day job, and I have, a dog and 2 cats. I don't have a partner or kids, so I don't have anybody I have to take care of or entertain. I can work till crazy hours, and it's okay. Charlie doesn't love it, but it's okay. So I just had a little more time. I do think that I'm going to slow that down going forward. I might put out 2 books a year instead of 3, because I do think that I rushed a little bit, and I'm not as pleased with the end quality as I could have been.
So speaking of the Dollhouse, let's jump in and talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
I'm going to read the synopsis so we can get the audience appetite wet for your book here.
Okay.
It says, Alfred needs dolls, blonde, blue-eyed human dolls that will help him rewrite his past and change his future. When Peter Botton's daughter Olivia was abducted nearly a year ago, he left his career as a respected journalist to find her. Now he spends his days searching for Olivia and helping other families of abducted children survive the emotionally and physically exhausting experience of finding a missing child. Twins Angel and Bud are used to making do. Their dad is in prison and mom won't win parenting awards, but thrives on neglect, but Angel isn't so strong. Now they're captives in a place called the dollhouse, and things have gone from bad to worse. The dolls are forced to restage old photographs by satisfying Alfred is not easy. He has a twisted sense of humor and a violent temper that explodes when things don't go his way, and sometimes when they do. Angel knows that if she and the other dolls are to survive this warped playtime, she can no longer be needy and afraid. She must prove how strong she can be. Where did you come up with the concept for the dollhouse?
Well, I can't give exact details because it does reveal part of the twist. I think most people have thought if I could go back in time, I would change this, or I would do this differently, or something you regret, or you would like to see how it would outcome. And so I thought about what if somebody thought they could do that by changing their own history. And one of the ways we track as humans our history is through photographs. And so it seemed to me that it was an opportunity to have this person decide, well, I'm going to retell these stories the way they were truthfully to me, but I need people to do that. And so that's where he decides he's going to pick up the dolls, because he does not see them as real people. He sees them as tools that he can use for his own purposes.
So that was a question from me, also from one of your fans, Jennifer Lynch. Also wanted me to ask you that question.
Okay. Well, hopefully that answers. I can tell you off the record what the idea was, but
yeah, we don't want to ruin the plot for everybody.
No.
I have to be candid on the questions I ask because of that.
Yeah.
So based on what you just said, how did you derive at having the victims be called dolls at that point?
Alfred did that. So writers, just so you know, are crazy. We really are. We have voices in our heads that these characters, like the whole cast of the dollhouse, is still in my head. They're still around most days. Alfred called them the dolls. I had no idea. And then oh yeah, I can see why you're doing that. Okay. So they're the dolls, and the place was the dollhouse because it's decorated like a dollhouse, kind of.
I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because I've talked to other authors too, and they've said the same thing, that these characters, so to most of us who don't write books, we just look at somebody that you create. But I've talked to a couple like Nicole Wilden. She says, the main character in her book lived in her head and took up residence every single day. He would never leave her alone until she would get up and write something. Exactly. So that's very true.
Exactly. I mean, but that's why. So in Little Doves, which is the fourth book, Angel is still there. She's not a main character, but she's there. So, because she won't go away, she's still hanging around. So if I write a book, she's decided she gets to be in it.
So speaking of Angel, she's a real unique character, so she starts out kind of weak. Everybody's making fun of her because she's not as strong. Turns out that by the time the end of the book comes, Angel is one of the most strongest women that you pretty much ever want to meet. Most people would crack under what she went through. What gave you the concept for Angel from going from weak to pretty much a heroine?
Well, that had to be, I knew from the beginning of the book, the way my writing process works, I know the end, and I know the people, and I know the thing that starts it, and then everything in between kind of happens. And I knew that the book would only work if she grew, if she went from being a baby, as she seems to think of herself, to being strong. But one of the things I really like about Angel, and this continues through other books, is that she is a true brave person, because she's terrified. She's terrified of all the stuff she has to do, but she does it anyway. That's who I aspired to be. I want to be somebody who can do the thing that needs to be done, even if it scares the crap out of me. And she does that. And so it needed to happen to make the book work for me.
Yeah, you guys really have to go read The Dollhouse to see that transformation. It's incredible. I don't really think I've read another book, last year or present right now that does such a good job of that. Usually the character is weak. They start out weak, and then somehow by the end they go, they get strong for a minute, but then they go back to being weak. Angel was a continuation of that, even to a point to where at one point she finally says, hey, I'm not the same old Angel that I used to be. I'm a whole different person now. So go read The Dollhouse, guys, because, it's a great story, and you'll see that transformation. With the traumas and the horrors that happens in The Dollhouse, were you afraid that it would trigger people?
Yeah. I thought about putting an anti-trigger warning because there is no sexual abuse. You think there might be, but there isn't. And so I know, especially with children, that's a big deal. People worry about that, and so do I. People in the world, the real world, are messed up. And I do think that people who like this genre are prepared for stuff like this, though. Unlike babies like you who hadn't really gone in there yet. But now you're getting used to it. Now you know all the crazy stuff we can do.
Well, the funny thing is, I look at you guys that write thrillers and then I read your books. I'm like, she didn't give off that vibe at all when I talked to her. So
I know when the Dollhouse came out, the compliance officer of my company, that we have a book club, and they decided to read my book. And afterwards, she actually asked our HR person if it was safe to have me as an employee. I'm a very nice person. I just have a crazy head.
So guys, go pick up The Dollhouse. That's book 1. You don't want to miss that one because that kind of segues into her second book, which is The Hunted. When I started reading that book, the things that they were doing to the girls in the house, yes, I immediately thought Toy Box Killer. It's kind of weird how when you read these thrillers, you start putting together actual real crimes that fit into that.
Right.
So that's for that. It sounds like the Toy Box Killer.
Yep.
So in this book, Angel once again is finding herself in another adventure. It's a little longer than 2 years later at this point. How did you come up with this particular concept besides the Toy Box Killer?
Well, the funny thing about that is it was supposed to be a short story. but then Miss Chicky Boom walked into the room and it was no longer a short story because Chicky Boom is one of my favorite characters I've ever written. And she is a dominant character in that book. And they decided we were getting a full book out of it. So that's how that came about.
Well, the one thing I will say between The Dollhouse and The Hunted Sins of the Father, which is the whole title of the book, it was seamless. It had been, a little bit more than 2 years. We get back into Angel again. I felt like I never put the book down. Like when I picked up The Hunted, like I was just continuing a story that unfortunately for Angel, the nightmare never seemed to end.
No.
How did you come up with the concept of Veronique, who is a very strong female in here, and it seems like she could be running the whole entire thing. So where did we get Veronique from?
Yes, and she did. You have to read The Hunted first, but she did get a short story that explains her backstory, which is dark and dark and dark. Again, she just came into my head. She was original. Well, I can't really say that. She was originally supposed to be a victim of the bad guy in the book, and because she actually enjoyed what he does, she joined him instead of becoming a victim. So that's probably the most I could say without giving away too terribly much.
So being that society looks at women the way that they do, what made you write her the way that you did? Because like I said, she was ruthless, probably, in my opinion, more ruthless than Johnny Law, who's the sheriff. Right. I'm always big into empowering women, but a lot of people, women or men, would not put Veronique in that position. So what made you write it that way?
Well, honestly, I don't know. She said who she was. She told me who she was, and she found an outlet for the thing that makes her, which is hurting other people. She found somebody that would play that with her and help her and empower her, basically give her toys to play with these other women and let her do her worst without stopping her. So it became sort of a partnership.
And I think that is very important because when you hear of real crimes that involve, women trafficking or things of that nature, it's always back to the men. But I think we often forget, just like with the Jeffrey Epstein case, that in some of these cases, we actually do have women behind the scenes. And in a lot of those cases, they could be the one that's calling all the shots.
Well, in the actual Toy Box Killer case, both his girlfriend and his own daughter brought women to him to torture. So it's not uncommon. And I was hoping that in those two cases, it was sort of like they felt like they had to, but nope, they both seemed to really enjoy it as much as he did. So women are not angels, no pun intended. I mean, there are dark women who have just as much messed up in their brains as the men do.
I can't move on this segment without talking about the woman, Chicky Boom. She's kind of a comedic character, and for lack of a better term, she has this serious "I'll kick your ass" side, hooks up with Angel. Yep. When you wrote her, who did you envision if someone had to play her? Who would you have picked her to play her?
Well, she's kind of J-Lo, kind of Selma Hayek. Selma Hayek in that old vampire movie that, what's his name? George Clooney was in. I think George Clooney was in. It's in Mexico, but where she's kind of a badass stripper. That reminded me of CB. CB and Veronique are kind of the dark and the light of one person in my head. They're very similar physically and ethnically, but they come from different backgrounds, kind of different backgrounds. But they're kind of the good and the bad of a person. And CB is mouthy and feisty and smart and funny, and she uses her powers for good, and Vero uses hers for bad, for anything bad she can make it happen.
Well, that's who I had picked. If I had to pick actresses, I picked Selma Hayek with Jennifer Lopez's body.
Yep.
That's what I kind of envisioned.
Yep, that's about right. Yep.
Now, the intriguing thing about The Hunted is Johnny Law, he seems to be a little bit more on the careful side. Alfred wasn't quite as careful as he was. There was a couple times when Johnny could have just done what he was going to do and then be done with it, but he changed his mind. What made you write him this way?
Johnny took an action when he was young to stop some things that were bad that were happening in his family. And he thought that would end it, but instead he seemed to inherit it. The bad person sort of became part of his personality. So I think that within him, there are two parts of him. There's the sheriff who wants to do good and help people. And then there's this inherited evil that he's been trying to fight his whole life that sort of wins. And so I think there's sometimes within him that there's a battle going on of him trying to stop it and evil winning or not, depending on what's happening.
Now, the Dollhouse and The Hunted Sins of the Father was very fast paced. They moved quickly. Then we come to Mercy, Angel of Death. It slowed down. Now, I was a huge fan of that because I felt like I had just came off of two books that pretty much grabbed me by my ankles and just ripped me through them. And I got, in Mercy, I got to learn a little bit more about Angel and Olivia, their families, what they're going through. Why did you choose to slow the Mercy down? Was it intentional or did it just happen?
It was intentional. And some of the things that happened in the Mercy, I knew were going to happen from the end of the Dollhouse. So I wanted to honor the people who'd been through the Dollhouse experience. I also wanted to talk about, as you know, because you've read it, there are so many people who've been through so many horrible situations, and everybody responds differently, the way they come out of it, the way they move on, whether they move on, the trauma they bring. All of those things are different. It's not one size fits all. And so I really wanted to look at the humanness of going through something so horrible and surviving it in whatever way that looks. And so that was a lot more psychological than, running away from a bad guy, or the physical aspects. And so I know it's a little slower, but I think it was an important part for me as a writer. And I hope readers like it, but I get it if they don't.
I think it was good because, like I said, it gave us a little bit more insight of Angel. We learned a lot more about her than we did in the first two books. We also learned a little bit more about Olivia. We learned a lot more about Peter Kohlrabi, which is the agency he ends up going and founding to help people of the same thing. So I appreciated the slowdown because it gave my brain time to relax, actually look deeper into the characters before things started to happen. And I think as readers, whether we agree or not, sometimes we need that. Everything can't be fast-paced, boom, boom, boom all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
So the one thing I am glad that you did not shy away from is the mental health aspects of that. As you know, like we've covered before, I didn't read a lot of thrillers until I found you. I did read one by Darby Kane. but I have noticed that some thrillers shy away from certain things, and that's one of them. And I think it's more important than ever when we got people, especially stars now, that's coming out about mental health, committing suicide. We just recently lost Twitch to what they say is a suicide now. So I do appraise you for that, because you did show us what happened to the characters mentally after all of that.
I thought that was important. I just, to me, there's some personal reasons, I think that's important, but it was to those characters to actually give them what they deserved. I thought it couldn't act like everything was just necessarily great afterwards. We're saved. Oh, good. Okay. Honestly, part of that, and I don't know if I should name a name, but I've always thought it was amazing how Elizabeth Smart came out of her situation and seemed absolutely fine. And so I wonder, does she have deep, dark, at night she has personal trauma events, and, what's her private life like? Does she really feel as good as she seems to in public? And it's none of my business, but that's why I wanted to explore it where I could make it my business in my book.
I wonder that too, because, she's married now, she has her own kids, and I read her book, and you're right, in Publix, it's like, hey man, yeah, nothing ever happened. And there was deep, dark moments. There's got to be something that triggers that.
Right. It can't, if she's really that compartmentalized, that's amazing. And I hope it doesn't end up eating her alive someday. But I wanted to take a look and look at the different ways people respond to stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know if we covered this before when I interviewed you the first time, but I'm a victim of domestic abuse. My dad was very abusive. And yes, we compartmentalize things very well, but sometimes those things come back to get you. So
they do.
From going young to an older man, I had to deal with those things. And there are certain things that does trigger me, even to this day. So that's why I'm glad authors like you write about these things. It makes people, whether the story is real or not, feel like they're not alone and they have a connection point.
Exactly. Because like you, I went through, a rough phase in my young adult life and young child life. And so we have to figure out ways to deal with it and keep going. And so as you did and I did, and I write about it. That's me. I get to write all sorts of crazy stuff, and that makes me feel better.
So out of those three, I think The Hunted was the most gruesome. It was definitely the most graphic. Yes. So if you had to write them over again, would you do anything differently?
Probably not. I think that book had to be graphic to understand how horrible what was happening was. So no, I don't think so. Some people have said The Mercy wasn't graphic enough. I think if you've been through trauma, I think it was. Maybe if you haven't had any trauma in your life, it wasn't. But I think if you've been through something, you recognize it and you feel it. So I'm okay with that too. But the other thing is I don't want to worry too much about what I wrote already. I have other books in my head that I want to focus on.
Well, I will tell you from reading the book, it's a great balance. As a thriller, yes, you want, the murder and the sexual aspect and all of that. Some people, I think, overdo it, but I think the way you write your stories, you have a great balance to that. So I think you give us just enough of the violence that we need to make sure we connect the story, but you also know when to back off of that at that time. So I think you do that very well.
Thank you very much. That's good to know.
Now, just to let you know, you are heavily praised for not having sexuality in the dollhouse. In Kristen's group that I'm a part of, that was the number one story that came up, is people said they would be triggered if you had written sex scenes between adolescent people. So that was greatly appreciated. What do you feel about authors that don't take the same stance that you do, but would have or have written sexual situations between that age group?
There are readers for every book. So I know there are some authors who do write things like that. I've read a few. I think Karen Rose writes books and she's graphic about what happens. And, there's child abuse that she goes into, and she's got a big audience. There's people who are comfortable reading that. There's people who aren't. If it happens in my stories, I'm most likely going to not have it happen on the page. We can all figure it out. We don't need to read line by line, step by step what's going on. So I'm not going to write about that for the most part, unless there's some important reason that I need to show what's happening. But so far, can't imagine doing that. I don't. see an opportunity for that.
So when it comes to the Dollhouse trilogy, I think that one's pretty much done. Guys, you have to read Veronique's short story. At the end, Sara will tell you exactly how to obtain that. If you don't read the short story in Veronique, you're going to wonder whatever happened to her and why there was no closure. You have to read that. That'll give you the closure that you're looking for. I felt the ending was done very well. I did not expect it to be who it was, but it didn't leave me saying either that you had to write another book to close that. I think that you closed the trilogy off very well. Now, other critics don't agree with me. They said you should have continued it.
Okay.
Did you feel it was time to just move on to something different? Or, I think it ended perfectly. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I was ready to move on. Yeah. Especially with her in particular. The thing with her is, unlike my other bad guys, she doesn't have a lot of redeeming value. So it was hard to keep her around too much in my head. Because I actually can find things I like about every bad guy I've had in the first 3 books, except her. And not the bad guys aren't always guys. Her, no. And actually Little Doves, no. There's some people in Little Doves that I never want to hear from again. Never want to think about again. They're hideous and horrible.
So now I do have a question for you from another author. I don't know if you know who she is. Her name is Laura Quinn. She is the author of a newly released book last year called Thicker Than Water. Her question is basically she would love to hear what your research process is.
I love research. I do. It's my favorite. I have all sorts of random books because I'm a book person, but I also use a lot of Facebook groups. There are some really great Facebook groups for things. YouTube and I are best buddies, which I always have to remember to switch out of my work account before I go Google looking for some of the stuff I look for. My big problem, I can get stuck on research. I can get a little too into it. For example, I'm writing a short story right now with Rosie B., who is from the Dollhouse series. She's from all of them, and I'm writing her a short story, and I have her buying a vintage jacket, and I spent probably 4 hours trying to decide who should have made that darn vintage jacket. Like, okay, you could have the story drafted by the time you decide this. So I'm a little obsessive, but I think a lot of people are too. I don't think that's a just me thing.
So I don't know if you know this or not, so I'll ask it. How do you feel that you are a celebrity among myself and your other readers? We look at you as being one of the true thriller writers out there. How do you feel about that?
Shocking, surprising, amazing, and wonderful, because I have imposter syndrome big time. I think a lot of writers do. We're always like insecure about what we're doing. Will people understand it? Will people like it? Will they think we're insane? Which is probably true, but in a good way. That's just amazing. And thank you so much. That means a lot. It's surprising, but awesome. Thank you.
So guys, go out and check out the Dollhouse trilogy or duality, all 3 books. You're not going to be disappointed in that. We're going to link all of that in the show notes. And if you can listen to the show, you may have an opportunity to actually win your own copies of these books. Sara does an exquisite job of it, and that's why she's one of my favorite authors. So now we're going to move into Little Doves, which is now the new book that by the time you hear this, it just got released on the 10th of January.
It's not on the wall yet.
It'll get there, though, I'm sure.
It will. It'll get there. Yeah. I need a bigger wall.
So here's an interesting question. I believe you told me a while ago that you were looking to release this particular book, even though I don't think you gave me the name of it at the time, on my birthday, November 1st. What happened to that date?
Well, the title was one of the issues. My alpha team did not like the title, and I could not come up with a new title. So that took a little bit. And releasing in December is never great because there's so much other things happening. So it got pushed a little bit. So I'm sorry, we missed your birthday.
I was looking forward to that too. And I'm like, all right.
Sorry.
So I'm going to go ahead and read the synopsis to Little Doves so that the audience gets a gist for it, because I have a lot of questions around this book. Okay. So it says, hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil, or pay the consequences. 20 years ago, Stacia King's 14-year-old sister was abducted, raped, and viciously murdered. Now, on the anniversary of her disappearance, another young girl has gone missing from the same exclusive country club. The cases can't possibly be connected since the murderer has been dead nearly 20 years, or can they? Is it coincidence or something more sinister? Nick Winston is in town to investigate the girl's disappearance, but he's drawn to a second case that's grabbing global attention. Someone calling themselves the Surgeon is attacking pillars of the community, men in very specific ways. The Surgeon isn't hiding in the shadows. They record the attacks and post them on social media with an invitation to watch as the assaults become more violent and more final. They're sending a message and demanding justice with the cryptic tagline, #StopSabine. Is the Surgeon a vigilante or a brutal killer? So let's jump into Little Doves. What was your concept behind Little Doves?
The Epstein case, it's frustrating that people can get away with so much when they have money and power. If you look at the list of people who were connected to Epstein, you'll be shocked. And they get away with it because they have money and power. And I was like, well, let's see what would happen if we did something different than that. And so that's what Little Doves is about.
Yeah, you touched on that greatly. I've done the Epstein case before, not on this podcast yet, but it's coming. But, he pretty much wrote his own jail ticket. He got to come up when he wanted to and go everywhere, and nobody was too harsh of putting him away.
Nope.
So I definitely got that right off the bat. Now, Nick, Peter, and Angel comes back. There's a reference to CB. Peter doesn't really come back in an active role. He's mentioned several times. Nick and Angel is front and center. You guys have to read The Dollhouse because that's where they come from. There's a lot of references about the dollhouse in there as well. And CB was mentioned. I know I asked you before if you're going to bring other characters over. How do we decide to bring them over to this?
Well, so when Coma Rebbe got developed in the third book of the Duality series, I decided it's kind of like a Criminal Minds environment. There's all sorts of people that can cross, and I want every book going forward to be standalone, but they share the Coma Rebbe environment. So they have those resources. They have Dr. Lisa, and they have Peter, and they have Nick. And so that lets the characters that people have come to love still appear and be around without it being their book or without having to read the other books to be there to understand. So that's why. And Nick wasn't supposed to be a main character, but then I realized there had to be somebody investigating the case. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. That's what Nick does. Let's make Nick do that. And I got to hang out with him some more, which is good. I like hanging out with Nick.
Well, I like Nick. You actually pegged him perfectly. I have interviewed a couple of now ex-LAPD officers or investigators, and I'm like, I don't think you guys ever retire. No. And even though Nick supposedly retired from the FBI, he moved on to Coma Rebbe. You read this book, you tell that his old FBI brain is just still there. He can't help but dip his nose into other things he's not supposed to.
Yep.
So bringing Nick and Angel and Peter references and CB to let you know in Coma Rebbe, that actually connected me to the other books. Now, I know that the Little Doves is a whole different story, but that's why I love your book so much because, again, I feel reconnected. Even if I didn't read The Dollhouse, I think from reading this one, read it first, I would be compelled to go back because now I want to know more about Nick and Peter and CB and everybody else that you can only get from that. So if that's what you're trying to get, you did it very well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I do like having the shared world, although I've learned as an author there's some problems there. I need to write down who's got what color eyes and things like that when they don't like a food or they do. I need to create a little Bible so I can keep track in all the future books of who does what, or not use the same names over and over again.
So I'm going to ask you this question, and then after you answer it, I'll tell you why I'm asking this question.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the cases of Melissa Witt, Melissa Trotter, or have you ever heard of the death fetish community?
No.
So Melissa Witt was abducted and murdered. I believe she was 19 years old. Her killer is still at large. She was found in the woods, naked, and what makes your book so compared to hers is she wore a Mickey Mouse watch that she was very fond of, and that watch has disappeared and never been found. LaDonna Humphrey wrote the book, Girl I Never Knew, Who Killed Melissa Witt, where she's been hunting the Melissa Witt killer now for the past 7 years.
Wow.
Melissa Trotter's case is also kind of connected to that. Larry Swearingen was convicted and executed for her murder, but now they're coming back saying they don't believe he did it. But
Oh,
she
no.
was strangled by pantyhose and left in the woods as well. The death fetish community is a community that LaDonna Humphrey and now her co-author, Alicia Lockhart, is fighting. They wrote a book called Strangled. If you've never heard of this community, it is actually people who partake in death fetishes, meaning that they get off on death, necrophilia, things of that nature. I was thinking you heard of these cases because when I'm reading your book, I'm writing LaDonna and Alicia saying, do you guys know who Sara Ennis is? You need to read her book, Little Doves, because it sounds like the Melissa Witt case with the pink watch and the whole thing that goes along with that. And then with the death fetish community, they make custom videos of some of these people depicting these scenes and things of that nature. So the whole entire video aspect of that. So I didn't know if you knew how closely connected you were to actual real life crime.
No. Well, I know that there are people who really do get off on the death stuff. That I knew. I just had not heard of those cases, and it's fascinating and also so sad. So now I'm going to have to check out those authors. Will you send me their information?
I will definitely send you the information and their links. I'm actually sending them your link too to say you have to read this book. It's almost like it's scary because it's like the three of you met into a room and said, tell me what you've been investigating and let me write this book. I mean, that's just how clear it was jumping off to me on that page.
Wow. Okay.
So
good to know. Scary, but good to know.
So once again, you wrote this book in POV. It has to be the most trickiest POV that I've seen. We've got several people telling their stories. You know, you got Stacia, you got, uncertain person, Natasha, you got Nick. Then it gets really crazy towards the end of the book. I can't dispel that because it'll give it away.
Yeah.
How did you come with writing POV again? And how did you stay grounded and on point with the different characters?
Well, one thing I do that I'm not sure other people do when they're writing multiple POVs is I will write a bunch of scenes if I'm in Angel, I'm just going to say Angel, even though she's not really in this. If I'm in Angel's perspective, I try to write as many scenes as I can. So I've got her voice in my head because they all do have different voices. At least I hope they do. And so I do that for the first draft. And then after that, I go through and refine the storytelling and put things in order and drive everybody crazy because I move the order and throw in new characters and change things. But that's the fun part of writing.
Again, I think we've discussed it before. I don't like to read a lot of POV books because they're not done very well. It feels like the character is either left off, or when you pick up, you don't know what happened between that. Or when you switch characters, sometimes you see that the character you were talking about previously blends in with the new character.
That's my big concern. Yeah.
That's never been the case with your books, if you're wondering.
Yay. Thank you. I work hard to avoid that.
I totally knew who was speaking. I totally knew what I was supposed to feel. I totally knew where it was going. But once again, you do it to us because, guys, you got to read this book. It is not who you think that it is. I think a good thriller will have you guessing at least 3-4 times.
Me too. But I will say, I am okay. If I figure out who the whatever is or what the twist is, I'm okay with that. It doesn't upset me to have guessed it because, well, it depends on how the author gets me there. If I feel like it was realistic and authentic and intentional. If they throw something in that I could never have guessed, that bugs me. Then I'm like, this isn't fair. But I don't mind. I like to see how things happen. So, I'm glad that you were surprised, but it doesn't bother me when people aren't.
Well, I thought for sure I had it pegged in Little Doves. I'm just going to give it to you. I'm like, yeah, Sarah's not getting me this time. This is exactly who it is. No way it could be this person. And then it turns out not to be that person. You're like, I didn't really see this one coming.
Good.
So when it comes to the surgeon, how did we arrive at the surgeon?
Oh, the surgeon. The surgeon was just fed up, just sick and tired of people getting away with being asshats. I'm sorry for my French, but just people getting away with things, and decided that not only did they want to stop that, but they wanted to send a message to other people who had similar ideas that this isn't okay and you're not going to get away with it anymore. There's people watching who are willing to do something about it.
So did you want us to feel a huge connection between Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell cases?
Huge, not necessarily, but I wanted you to recognize it. I wanted the general public to understand why somebody would feel like that, like the surgeon does. And I think most of us do feel like we get why that would be the case.
Well, because the first thing I thought of, I said, this is a mix between Jeffrey Epstein and Hugh Hefner. You know, because at one point he's doing the Epstein thing, he's trying to get all these girls. And then the other point, there's another like facade where these women just want to be there. And in the background, we have a woman that's doing the recruiting. So that was easily picked up.
And that's the way I felt. And it was, in a way, having the two different things going on. It shows just all the ways that women can be taken advantage of and used by people, by our society.
I do feel that Little Doves was probably more on the gruesome side. There was a little bit more sexuality in that. What did you derive at that? How did you write these scenes? What made you write these scenes here?
I wanted the reader to feel as horrible as the victim felt. That's why the prologue, I know, is pretty rough. I will say it's not sexually explicit. It is emotionally horrible, at least to me. I wanted there to be no doubt that this is absolutely horrific and that the people doing the bad things enjoyed it. I didn't want it to feel accidental. I didn't want it to feel like they couldn't help themselves. This was a conscious decision that they took great pleasure from. And I wanted there to be a concrete understanding of why someone might choose to respond the way the surgeon did.
Well, Little Doves is a great book. It really fits in well with the other three that you've written. What would you like everybody to take away from Little Doves?
Don't do bad things. People will come looking for you. I don't know. Maybe never give up, and love is going to go on and keep you going forever. Family can be everything, and family is not necessarily the people that share your blood. There's a lot of things in this book that I think resonate with me.
Is there anything in closing that you would like to say to your fans and readers out there?
Just thank you for reading my books. Thank you for not thinking I'm crazy, or at least not so crazy you don't want to read my books. I love hearing from readers. So if you have questions or ideas, if you want to see CB do something on her own or whatever, feel free to email me. I love talking to readers. Go back and read The Dollhouse if you haven't read it before.
So last but not least, what's next for Sara Ennis? Are we looking at another book pretty soon, or how's that going?
Well, there's a short story coming within the next month or so. And it's a spoiler-free one, even though it is a Dollhouse duality character. And then I'm trying to decide, I have a couple of, I'm not like some of our author friends who have, 40 book ideas at any given time. I'm not that person. Usually I have one or maybe two. I'm trying to decide which order for the two that I have really solidly in my brain. But I know I will have another book out this year, maybe two if we aim for your birthday, but I'm not sure. For sure, a second book, maybe a third.
All right, Sara, well, we thank you for coming on the show today. I think you are fabulous. You are definitely in my top of my authors, one of my favorites. I'm on your art team, and I'm privileged to read your books early. So thank you for coming on the show. Anytime you want to come back, the invitation is always open.
I would love to. Maybe we do a panel someday and you have a bunch of your favorite thriller writers all together.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That would be awesome.
That would be fun. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And tell Neva hi for me.
I sure will, Sara. Thank you for coming today.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So you heard it there. The fabulous Sara Ennis. Make sure you pick up her new book, Little Doves, which will drop on the 10th of January. So when you hear this, it would already be out. Also, go back and pick up the Dollhouse trilogy. If you haven't read those before Little Doves, you're going to want to, because there are references there. All of those links will be able to be seen in the show notes. And the Dollhouse, I'm told, is going to be free, I believe, starting from the 10th up through Sunday. So go pick that up on Amazon. All right, everybody, I thank you for joining me here today. Also, be safe out there, and I hope that you guys are having a great start to the new year. Always remember these things. Always stay humble. A little love and compassion goes a long way. And this is the podcast where two passions becomes one. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Authors. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. On Facebook at True Crime and Authors. On Twitter at Authors True. On YouTube and TikTok at True Crime and Authors. And email at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Dazzling_Ray from Fiverr. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild from Fiverr. And I'm the voice guy, your imaging guy from Fiverr. See you next time on True Crime and Authors.